talking earlier. You listened a little bit of it about, and it's not to besmirch, as Cal said, the legacy of George H.W. Bush. I think most people agree they're, as good and decent a human being who has been elected president probably in my lifetime. We're talking about Jimmy Carter being a good and decent man. I think most people believe that George Herbert Walker Bush was a patriotic, honorable, and decent person. And those are great virtues of which to leave as your family legacy or your national legacy for that matter. Scott, I took that, the events of yesterday, and turned it into something because that's what talk show radio does. I mean, we try to provoke some intuition and thought. But I want to get your take on this. It's a bit ironic to me that in America, we allow a group of people. You and I have these philosophical debates and disagreements, and they're normally respectful. But this is not philosophical. This has nothing to do with small government or big government or a program or defunding a program. This is more about the intent of our founders. When they created this country and George Washington served 2 terms and then said, look, this is not a career appointment. This is not something that I'm supposed to do. Because if I do, then I'm kind of hypocritical in that we left because of a king and I want to become a king. So I'm going to be straight up and honest and forthright with the idea of America. And I'm arguing, Scott, that the most aristocratic class in America today call themselves public servants. I know we've got corporatists. I know we've got, kind of a top-down society and as Cal said, a pecking order. But from your perspective, when I say that the most aristocratic group of people in America today are those who call themselves public servants, and I'm not talking about an R or a D. I'm just talking about the notion of people who have so entrenched themselves in careerist sort of ways in our government. You say what?
Well, I mean, absolutely. You could talk about people who are in business, for instance, and CEOs and how much money they're making. But we've talked about in this show before, and I think there's a good case to be made that if we look at individuals who are in government, there is something of a caste system, that you have to have either A, lots of money, or B, people with who you're connected to have lots of money. And it has become a career. In George Washington's time, now keep in mind George Washington also left in part because he got fed up with all of the bickering that was taking place in Washington. But in Washington's time, being a member of Congress was not a career. It was hard to get to Washington, D.C. because of the long distances involved. It didn't pay a lot of money. And so people would spend 1 or 2 terms in the House or the Senate and then say, I'm done, I'm heading home. Now it has become a career. And the belief is that these individuals who call them, and this is one of the reasons for Donald Trump's election, that these people who call themselves public servants oftentimes will say and do whatever they have to say and do, that's the perception, to remain in power as opposed to doing what's best for the public good.
Okay, having said that, and you brought up Trump, and I think that's interesting, I had 2 people who see the world in very different ways send me an article yesterday. The article was the Trump fail, and it's talking about the realities of Donald Trump. We understood why we elected Donald Trump. A lot of people didn't like it, some did, but everybody, I think, who is politically astute understood it. It was a disruption. I mean, America wanted a disruptor. Now, there's an argument that a lot of people are making now that Donald Trump is pretty obvious now he's not going to drain the swamp. In fact, he's a grifter who has put other grifters in positions of influence in our federal government, and that ain't what we elected him to do. Having said that, you've got people like David Brooks and George Will who believe the future and fate of the Republican Party needs to be given the power back to the elites, back to the aristocratic class. I'm of the opinion that ain't going to happen. I mean, Donald Trump has exposed the system, the flaws of aristocracies and, people who go into government and get filthy rich by making it a career. When I say that okay, I'm ready to admit to you and anybody else that Trump's not going to drain the swamp. He's done nothing toward drain, but he has exposed the corruption. Now the counter argument would be, well, he's just as corrupt as they are. Okay, fair enough. But he's exposed the corruption. What do you think comes next?
I think about the Watergate babies who came into power in 1974, talking about reforming the way Washington was run, and then many of them ended up becoming these careerists themselves. And the perception was that instead of changing Washington, Washington changed them. And we've talked in the show about Donald Trump and how I believed he was becoming more and more a member of the establishment. And I'm glad to see you finally come around and agreed with me. So,
well, I don't know that
there's hope for you now. I think.
No, I want to jump in here. I'm not saying that I think he's a member of the establishment. I think it's pretty obvious that the establishment is so entrenched, and it's not ideological. I think you would agree with that. This is not about big government or small government. This is not the debate that a lot of us wish were happening. We have these debates on Good Morning PD. We probably wish there were more debates like that. It is the belief that this guy's a threat because this guy wants to disrupt the way we conduct business in government. And you as a Republican, think about what you've got at stake. Me as a Democrat, think about what I've got at stake. And we've got to unite and not let this guy disrupt but so much of our universe, because we may have to go find somewhere else to make a living and another line of work. But Scott, I don't believe that Trump has become a part of the elite establishment. I just think he's come to accept, I've only got 6 more years, maybe 2 more years, worst case scenario. It's a lot harder battle than I thought it would be.
Well, there are 2 ways of looking at it. The fact that we have people calling them the Trump-publicans as opposed to the Republicans does suggest that Trump has had an impact, at least insofar as the Republican Party is concerned. But whether that's going to be a long-term trend is anybody's guess. No doubt that this populist sentiment that we're seeing on both sides of the aisle, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, is something that both parties are going to have to come to grips with.
What is the commonality of that populism in the Republican and the Democrat ranks?
I think there is this sentiment that the establishment, quote unquote, seems more worried about its own interests than the interests of the people. And there's this desire at the grassroots level of saying enough is enough. We want to be heard. And hence you have individuals who are willing to shake up the system, be it the Bernie Sanderses or the Donald Trumps, who have this people listening to them. Now, granted, in the case of the Democrats, it was Hillary Clinton who ended up winning the nomination. But the fact that you don't hear the name Clinton spoken very much, and my father just told me yesterday, he read an article that the Clintons are giving speaking tours and hardly anybody's coming out to see them.
Nobody's showing up.
Yeah, I think points very much to the fact that the Clintons now are being pushed aside. And we do see on the Democratic Party these individuals who are considered more progressive, that I'll just use that term, progressive, younger individuals who are being supported by the grassroots are now getting positions in the House, especially. And so there is this push at the grassroots of we want to be heard. We're tired of Washington telling us how things are going to be. We want Washington to work for us.
You're talking about the effect Trump has had or the impact Trump has had on the Republicans. Rev and I were talking yesterday. Liberal rocker Bruce Springsteen gave an interview to some London newspaper over the weekend and said, I mean, he despises Trump. I mean, he's opposed to everything Trump stands for and believes in and talks about. But he said, in a very interesting way, there's no Democrat that can beat him. He talks to people in a very relatable language. The question to you is, despite the animosity Democrats have with Trump, despite the disagreements Democrats have with Trump, they've got to figure out a way to harness some of his message, the populism, the relating to working class Americans, which has really been the bread and butter of the Democrats for a long, long time. And Trump has kind of hijacked that. So when Springsteen, who was a rock and roll singer, but kind of politically astute, I mean, he keeps up with politics and he's very involved in politics. You talk about the transformation Trump has made on the Republican Party. I got to believe that some Trumpism must find its way into the Democratic ranks. You say?
In the respect of getting support at the grassroots, finding out what people at the grassroots level want. The Republicans did a much better job than the Democrats did in 2016. And the Democrats have been working very hard in that effort. Certainly we are seeing an impact in the House of Representatives in that. Senate, not so much. The big problem the Democrats have is finding that person who at the national level can take that grassroots support and bring it up to a national level where they can win the presidency. I do think there are people out there who can pose a challenge to Donald Trump, who have that kind of message, who have that kind of voice. But the question is, can they get that hardcore level of support that we're seeing with Trump. I mean, no matter what Trump does, he still seems to have that 33 to 35% of Americans who support him through thick and thin. We have to find a Democrat who also is able to get that hardcore grant of support, and then find a way to attract those individuals such as independents or maybe liberal or moderate Republicans into the ranks.
But, Scott, the last question is a comment, and you comment on my comment. The problem with the Democrats is they've made as their priority very progressive ideological issues. And the Trump voter is not a progressive. I think you would agree to that. He's not an ideologue. He's not driven by conservatism or liberalism. He's a middle-of-the-road guy who goes to work every day and believes the government doesn't have his best interests at heart. If the Democrats are going to be successful in navigating the waters in not a primary, a general election, how do they do that when their priorities seem to be all about progressive and liberal climate change and free education and all these other things? I just don't believe the Trump voter has much of an appetite for progressive ideals and policies.
Getting the hardcore Trump voter is not going to be easy.
But that's the way you got to win the election. You would agree with that in the general election.
Well, not necessarily, because if you can keep the support of Democrats, and we did see the swell of support for Democrats, especially for progressive Democrats at the state level.
In fairly progressive districts.
But we also saw in states that we generally saw go red, heavily red, though Democrats doing very well there, in some cases winning, like Kansas, for instance, in other cases coming close to winning, or at least doing quite well. That in itself just sends a message. The Democrats are finding a message that is working. The issue is going to be at the national level, can they attract independents? Can they attract some of the constituencies, such as labor, which turn to Trump, or the elderly, which turn to Trump, and bring them back to the Democratic fold? Because traditionally, those constituencies have supported the Democrats. I think they can, but it's going to take a very strong message and a lot of work.
So, is it Bernie Sanders?
I don't think Bernie Sanders, no, but I think someone like a Biden, maybe. Now
another 100-year-old man.
Well, yes, but someone who can rally the support of labor unions, someone who has that progressive message, but at the same time is able to attract independents and even maybe individuals in the moderate and in the Republican ranks as well. Whether it will be that person, I don't know.
Interesting. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Good to see you. We'll take a break. Hey, for Scott, we got to play Happy Hanukkah. We may do that tomorrow, right? Adam Saturday.
Thank you.
Hey, well, let's do it.
O.J. Simpson. Not a Jew.
We'll do it on a Tuesday when he's
We'll do it
here.
on a Tuesday in respect of Dr. Kaufman. Take a break. Back in a minute. Thanks to QAT. Visit their website, teamqat.com.